Que la famille. Que la famille.
So when I was talking to Vladimir about what I might talk with you about tonight, at first I was going to talk about some incredible technical achievement that my team has done or something like that, and he was like, yeah. But maybe the thing that I have the most to offer for folks here is how to grow engineering teams. How to a lot of companies, they start really small. They have only a small number of people altogether, a small number of engineers, maybe just a CTO, maybe a CTO and one other engineer. And as success happens, then you feel the need to grow your team. And it's a very pivotal time a time of change, when you grow your team from something that's very small, where when you start a company, typically everyone knows everyone. It feels like a family, right? And then you start to grow, and it's interesting because at that moment, every single person that you add to your company changes the company in a big way. We have many thousands of people at Comcast, and when one person joins the company, it generally doesn't have that big of an effect on the culture. But when you're small, it really matters a lot. And this is both the good news and the bad news, right? Because if you hire great people who add passion, have strong values that match the company's values, then and maybe have a different background or different set of skills, then it changes the company in a big way. So I urge you to kind of think about that. So just by way of introduction, so I've been at Comcast for about 6 years, which is the longest I've been at any job in my entire career. So that's kind of amazing, and I actually kind of like it. It's the biggest company I've ever worked at by far. One thing that I really like about it is I've had the opportunity the last couple of years to manage both engineering and product, which is very unusual in large companies. But it's something that we've been experimenting with in the management team, and actually trying to push that down into the organization. And so this way, typically in companies, the product people and the engineering people have all kinds of arguments about what's the right thing to do or what's possible. So I get to have all those arguments with myself. So it's kind of fun. In terms of things I've worked on, I've done a lot with television, creating interactive experiences on TV, and I manage all of the metadata and content discovery for television. So, search and recommendations and our menuing system and all this kind of stuff. I've also done a fair amount with our home automation systems, IoT stuff, and I'm pretty passionate about that as well. And we've actually tried to find ways of combining television and home automation. So that's kind of some fun stuff that I've gotten a chance to work on. As Vladimir said, I've advised a lot of companies. One of the some of the companies I've advised had, when they were just starting, and they had no engineers, and they were trying to figure out, well, how do we get going? How do we build our product? And so one of them in particular I really enjoyed. We had 3 successive weekend hackathons, and so we got a bunch of people that we knew to come. The founder has a beautiful house in north of San Francisco on the ocean, and so we had 20 people, and we basically coded for like 72 hours straight. And the first thing we did was a website. The first hackathon, we did the website. The second hackathon, we did mobile application. And the third hackathon, we really started to work on the marketplace that they were doing. So that's been a really great thing. And so I said, I'm the vice president of the hackathon. And it was interesting doing these hackathons was fascinating, because we had a very limited amount of time Friday afternoon to Sunday afternoon. And we were trying to accomplish something really big in that time, like build a website from scratch. And in a lot of ways, this is not unlike what startups have to do when they're very young. Maybe they have limited funding, maybe they have only funding to last, 6 months or something like that, and they have to produce something really valuable in that amount of time in order to get to the next level, whether it's raising more money or getting the first customer or whatever it might be. And so one of the things we learned in that process was a big thing is to figure out how to manage risk, especially technical risk. And this is something that I try to talk to a lot of companies about, which is, okay, so we settle on what tools and platforms are we going to use on Friday afternoon, and we start coding Friday night, and we stay up till midnight, and then we kind of wake up in the morning, and Saturday at around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you start to say, is this technical approach going to work, right? Have we learned enough about it? And by the way, we only have 24 hours left. And so it kind of teaches you, okay, well, maybe we have to pivot. Maybe we have to step back. Maybe there's some simpler solution that will get us where we need to go now without creating a big mess that needs to be cleaned up later. And I think just if you sort of stretch a weekend out into 6 months, I think engineering leaders have to do a lot of that same kind of thing about figuring out the appropriate level of technical risk to take, and always being conscious of are we getting to where we need to get to in the right amount of time. So that's been great. The other area that I've consulted with startups on is companies that have more like 5 or 10 engineers, and they need to grow, and so a number of different things happen to companies when they go from 10 people to 50 people. Let's say the first thing is not everyone knows everybody's name anymore. You have to meet people, find out what they do, and this kind of thing. But more importantly, you start to take on people with very different skill sets. The more you're doing, the more different kinds of skill sets you need. A lot of times the company will start doing multiple things at the same time. So for example, maybe some of the people are focused on launching the first product, but some people are working on the future, things that we're going to do in a year, if you have the luxury to think that far ahead. And when you have that many people, inevitably you need to think about management. And a lot of times, small companies, they don't need a lot of engineering management. But as you grow, it really becomes important. And so I've helped companies figure out, well, what kind of engineering leadership do they need, and what kind of track record do they need to have with managing teams and actually shipping products. One of the things that happens too is that as you grow, you need to create some kind of hierarchy, right? Because if you have one engineering manager, they can't manage 20 engineers effectively, right? So you need to create a little bit of hierarchy. There's kind of a risk of getting too hierarchical too fast. Also, there's a risk of, sometimes people have a very fancy title in a startup that maybe in 6 months or a year, the title doesn't fit anymore. And it creates kind of a problem because you made somebody vice president of engineering, but they might have been fine to be a vice president of engineering for 10 people, but maybe not for 100 people or something like that. So it's good to kind of think about that. One thing that happens in almost every company that I've talked to about this is there's most startups have a CTO. In many cases, it's a co-founder. And in a lot of times it's the person who's got the technology vision to achieve what the company really wants to do. And then as things go on and you need more engineering leadership, there's often this question about, does the CTO become the vice president of engineering or not? And sometimes it's perfectly great, and that's the right thing to do, and other times not. I think what I kind of go back to is, that there's, being sort of the holder, the keeper of the technical vision of the company is not the same as managing people, really executing and delivering on a schedule, figuring out who the right people are to hire, matching people to tasks, this kind of thing. And so I think it's important for CTOs to kind of step back and think, what can I do that's going to add the most value to the company going forward? Maybe try to take some of the ego out of it, and also just think about, what do I want to do? How do I want to spend my time? So in many cases, the CTO will conclude that they actually want to hire an engineering vice president. And then there's always the fun question of who works for whom, right? So, I think there, again, it's a question of how the people want to spend their time and what they want to focus on. And there's no one right answer, but it's an issue that comes up all the time. So something else that I always talk to startups about is there's this difference between vision and innovation on the one hand, and execution on the other hand, right? And the really successful companies are the ones who have a great combination of both vision and ability to execute, right? So execution means you figure out the features you're going to develop for your first MVP, and you figure out when you need to deliver that MVP, and you actually deliver it, and you cut features when you have to, and deal with things as they come up, but you are really very focused on executing. And so as you think about scaling your engineering team, I think it's important to think about, you don't want to lose your vision, right? You don't want to, probably if you are successful getting funding, you got funded not just to deliver your MVP, but you got funded because of your long-term vision. And so you certainly don't want to lose that, and you want to keep that firmly in your mind. But at the same time, you need to ship a product, right? And so to do that, you need a different set of skills, as I've been saying. I have this thing I always talk about with, I think about three different kinds of engineers. I call them starters, doers, and finishers, right? So starters are, well, you know who the starters are, right? The starters are the ones who have the incredible ideas. I often say that starters are fearless, right? They say, it's, maybe some other people would say it's impossible to accomplish this, but the starters will say, get out of my way. In the U.S. we say, hold my beer. And they just go in and do it, and they're not afraid to make a mess. Is typically the thing about starters, but they accomplish things that they take things to a level that no one thought was possible, and so most great startups have some starters in them. So then doers, and I generally say that starters do about 20% of the work in a company in general, and then doers are the people who take these ideas and maybe prototypes or proof of concept, the demo that got you your funding or whatever, and actually turn them into products. Turn them into products that actually can be launched. And so, I often say, doers can have a great career running around after starters, kind of cleaning up the mess they make. I once, when I worked at, I can say the name. When I worked at Technorati, I worked for the CEO, but he was also the technical founder of the company. And I said, Dave, my goal is at the end of the year, my first year of working for you, all your code will be gone, right? And it was. So anyway, but I think doers typically have the attention on execution, on making the product happen. And I think usually doers do about 60% of the work, and then there are finishers. I wish I was a finisher, but so finishers typically do the last 20%, and if you think about the 80-20 rule, the last 20% is 80% of the work in terms of difficulty. Finishers are the people who they are very focused on quality, on hitting dates, on identifying risks. Finishers love to fix bugs, and you can't be successful without them. So since I'm not a finisher, I usually try to hire as many of them as I can. So anyway, as you think about building out your engineering team, I think it's important to think about this kind of balance between these are really just sort of different, almost like personality types when it comes to engineers, and think about what's the right balance or mixture for your company. So anyway, so I guess the other thing that I wanted to talk about was just thinking about culture. I talked a little bit about it at the beginning. I think it's was really happy when I was upstairs and walking around down here. These really inspirational posters really speak to a lot of cultural values that it seems like the family really has, and I think it's very, very important for companies, groups of people working together, to be really explicit about their values and what kind of culture they are trying to create. A lot of times when people start a company, there's 3 or 4 people. They think none of this stuff matters. All that matters is doing the first demo, so we get the first round of funding, and all of this kind of stuff. And they all knew each other anyway, and they've worked together for years, and and so they don't think that explicitly about, well, what are the values of the company? What kind of people do we want to have working here? But as you grow, it just becomes really more and more important. And so. In many cases that I've run into, both in large and small companies, cultural fit, having the appropriate culture sometimes trumps like engineering, brilliance, right? People can be trained and get more skills as they go through their engineering career. And you can train people, you can educate them, you can help them improve in their technical skills. It's a lot harder to change people's basic orientation and the culture that they present to other people in the company. And so it's really important. And this also speaks to the issue of diversity, which I saw some good posters about that here, but I think it's really important to establish diversity as a value in the culture and actually carry through on those commitments early along. I mentioned before, every single person you hire in a small company kind of changes the culture. One of the things that people say is that why women can't succeed in some companies, and maybe there are 15 employees in the company and they're all guys, and then you have the first woman in the company, and she doesn't fit in that well with the 15 other guys that are already there, and imagine if that was times 10. So I think whether it's gender diversity or diversity of background, of national origin, it's really important to think about that right at the beginning, and because that will let you acculturate people as diverse as you want them to be, and make them feel welcome in a diverse culture. So I kind of put that out as another thing. Let's see. I think that might be enough for right now. Okay, thanks everyone.
Que la famille. Que la famille.